All right, there we go. Hey, everybody, how are you doing? Hope you guys are doing well. Uh, Again, usually this is one of those impromptu streams that we've been talking about. If this is the first time out, kind of joining in and checking it out. Usually, uh, usually on Thursdays I play D&D with our group, with the group online, but we actually ended up switching things around. So we had the game earlier in the week, so I thought this would be a good time to kind of jump on and do one of those sort of impromptu streams, kind of talk about some stuff, kind of what's going on. And I thought this would be a good opportunity to talk kind of specifically about prep, which is a thing that I think most dungeon masters or game masters of any tabletop system struggle with. Is we struggle with prep, how much to do, you know, how much um, how much to do, what to prep, and because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do with prep is we're trying to guess what our players are going to do in the next session. So, and that's extremely hard. That's an extremely hard thing to do, for sure. And I've been doing D&D, running and playing it for over a decade. I guess probably. I think it is on about 15 years, and that's as an adult. Like I played it some, obviously, and did things with it as a child, but as an adult, that's me doing it. And I found as I did it and did, you once you get into a rhythm, and the more I think it's different systems and different groups that you run for, and more experience that you see working with other DMs. And if a DM is open to it, maybe like after, maybe not the session, but maybe after a specific adventure, you can ask them about, like, hey, can I see sort of your prep notes, and like, how did you prep this thing, and how did you know when to improvise or how to redirect us, things like that. They can ask of other people, because of course the more sort of points of information you have to tack onto your own personal experience, the better your sort of prep will become. You'll be much better as you're going through that, whether that's other DMs, what shows up in sort of published modules. That's a good thing. Is like if you're running a published adventure, you can look at the end of a session and be like, okay, well, I didn't need to really prep this thing as much, or I didn't really want to, or I didn't really rely on the box text or anything like that, the read aloud text. And as you do that again and again and again, you kind of understand, what the specific parts of prep you need to do to be successful at a game. And so I thought I would share one of the things that I do. So I have a very specific sort of session sheet that I use. And that's for sort of ongoing adventures. Now, I don't use this necessarily for a one shot, because I feel like in the one shot, most of your time is spent dealing with the adventure, whereas the session sheet that I use to prep for like individual game sessions is meant to go as part of an ongoing adventure. So an adventure that takes multiple is expected to take multiple game sessions to play, and so I need to focus on what I specifically need to have for the next game, the next session, and all those session sheets are built up together to are influenced by the nature of the adventure itself, and they're kind of points that information goes back and forth across and kind of informs each other. So I thought we'd talk about that a little bit. There's really I have basically the it's a worksheet that I've created for myself, and it basically has 7 steps that I kind of go through that helps me sort of prep for sessions. And really, it's not even a total of 7 steps. It's kind of as many steps as you can get to, really. With some of the stuff at the end is more superfluous. It's more sort of like bonus stuff that kind of helps with preparing you for if things go off the rails, or if you need to switch things around, or you want to add some extra sort of like sensory details or other things, sort of supplemental things, handouts, things of that nature that kind of help elevate the game. But you can't prep handouts and then not prep the rest of the game that the handouts are supposed to be in, right? And so it's definitely about sort of like saving some of that some of that prep stuff, some of that like bonus prep stuff for later. So let me go ahead and swap this over. We can take a look at it real quick. You guys have any questions or just want to give a shout out, say hey. But let's see. So that way you guys can see what I'm looking at. Let's see. I should bring it up. There we go. So yeah, this is kind of the sheet in its entirety. It's not very long. Like I said, there's basically 7 steps of it, and of those 7 steps, they're not even all steps that you must have done by the session. There's some extra stuff that's kind of in there to kind of reduce the amount of impactful time that you need to spend prepping. So I don't really have anything else to kind of talk about, and I think that this, my hope is that the stream will be relatively quick because we're looking at a small document, and I'll talk a little bit about it, but it's kind of what you see is what you get. So the first step, of course, is the session recap. So one of the things that, of course, I like to do, and I know a lot of other dungeon masters and game masters like to do, is start the session with a recap of what happened last time, right? Whether you're one week between games, or maybe you're multiple weeks, or even a month or more between games, then real life happens. And though in the game, it was only 15 minutes ago, but for us in the real world, it can be many days, and we have entirely other lives that we have to keep track of. So it's very easy to sort of forget what happened in the last session. So it's nice to start with sort of a recap as sort of like a refresher for that, right? So one of the things that I do, and I think a number of DMs do as well, is use a technique in which you let the players do the recap rather than you necessarily dictate the recap to the players. Some DMs want one person to do it. I'm more of a let's kind of go around the horn and get everybody's input, because I feel like if we couple together everybody's memory of the last session and everybody's different notes of what they remember, we get a pretty good overall picture of what actually happened that last time. And then, of course, me as the DM, I have my own notes about what happened during the last session, my own recap notes. And so that gives me the ability to kind of correct them if they say some incorrect information. It's also a good time to note any sort of incorrect conclusions they've jumped to, and not necessarily, and it depends on the game, right? You can correct those if that's important to correct, like if they just are completely off the mark, or like the characters know this information, but the players have somehow either forgotten it or mixed it up with something else, so you want to correct that. But you can also use sort of any incorrect conclusions they jump to use to need sort of what you've prepared. So, I mean, one of the key things to becoming, I think, sort of a higher level of dungeon master or game master is listening. You got to listen to the players and what they say and what they remember. And when you do that, and a lot of times they're going to have ideas that are better than yours. And the idea is, just sort of like in the writing process, is to kill your darlings, right? So don't stick to your script if somebody else has a better idea and you're like, man, that's a lot better. I'm just gonna make that's what actually happened. That's going to be the plan now, and just kind of shift things around. It, especially if they're really excited about something, or they've really run down a specific rabbit trail, even though that's a trail of breadcrumbs maybe you didn't really mean to set in front of them. But when you listen to their reasonings, you're like, yes, actually, that all makes sense. I understand how you got to that conclusion. And if that ends up being sort of a better or more interesting or more dynamic story, maybe you're like, okay, we're just going to use that instead. That's just going to be the truth then. So that's a really good way, I feel like, to start off a session and to get a gauge on what the players remember out of the game, and where you think that they think the plot is maybe heading, where the story's heading. Another sort of benefit is this, that it sort of stealthily allows you to understand what is and is not memorable in your games. by thinking about what are the things that they remember from the previous session and what are the things that they totally have forgotten and like weren't memorable at all, even if you put a lot of work into it, right? Um, what I find is that at the end of the sessions, there's a lot of advice that talks about asking for feedback, and I do that in the games that I run. Right, I like to use there's an older YouTube channel called D6 Mafia, and it was an actual play, and it's been over for many years. But the idea was that he would ask for questions, comments, and concerns at the end about the session. The DM would, and while that's useful, and I still do it, I think if you do that, you'll be like me, and I think like most DMs and game masters, is that you find that people aren't really prepared to give you a lot of critical feedback. Most of the time, you're going to be like, they're going to say, "Game was good." Okay. You try to elicit and just find out like what are the things that people want more in the game, what do they want to see less of, what frustrated them, what things that maybe need a change or a little tweak for you to make the game a little bit better for everybody involved. And that's really hard to do, sort of like that face to face at the end of the session. Like people just aren't usually prepared or open or willing to sort of give that feedback most of the time. So you can use sort of like a listening session in that session recap at the beginning if you have the other players kind of tell you about it. Is they can be like, oh, this is the stuff they found memorable. Oh, this is the stuff that they didn't really engage with or they forgot about. Or they'll do something like, I think I do it as a player, and I think lots of others do, is they'll talk about, oh man, that encounter really sucked, and we'll talk about it sort of like in the path back, and we're like talking about the last session or sessions before, and be like, oh, that goblin fight was a real just drag. It just dragged on forever, even though it was really clear that we were going to win it from very very early on. You're like, oh, okay, so maybe we look for some ways to make the combat more dynamic, or once the scales sort of tip, that it's very clear that one side is going to win. You as a DM sort of draw it to the conclusion once the tension's kind of gone out of the situation, and you can look for those sort of like listen to the feedback that you do get when, especially because it's unsolicited feedback, right? And that's a really good way to sort of use that session recap in two ways, both to make sure that the players understand what's going on and that you understand what the players think is going on, and also to get some of the feedback about your DMing that a lot of times that you're not going to get directly from players. So that's the session recap. That's the step one. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. When I'm doing the session recap, it's usually just bullet points like, oh, they went here, they did this, they talked to this, they had a really funny encounter with this guy, or they really pissed off this person, or they really screwed up. And like I like to try to make it funny and light too whenever they do things, like, and try to remember some of the jokes that they told in the session and things like that, and try to include those as well to make it fun. After that, the second thing that we have to do, our step two, is a purposeful start. If you're familiar with Mike Shea of Sly Flourish, he has a very similar thing. He just calls it strong start, but they're basically the same. I like purposeful start as a different name because I feel like strong start immediately kind of pushes you to action, which usually gets interpreted most of the times as a combat encounter, right? But for me, it's about getting the players and their characters in motion immediately, right? They need to be working towards the climax of the adventure that they're on. So the idea is not to put them in a position where I ask them what they want to do, and then we sit around the table kind of staring at each other as players try to figure out what they're going to do, because that's sort of one of the things that I found in my running games, is that if you start a game by without any direction, you ask the characters, like, because the way you ended it, it's them waking up in the end of the morning or something like that, without a sort of a clear directives set up, that you'll ask them, okay, what do you want to do? And then the players will waste sort of 20 minutes talking back and forth, and then in the end they'll decide to do something completely different than the last thing they talked about doing in the last session. And then that means that all the time that you spend prepping, the prep that comes after this was completely out of the window because they decided to, zig when you thought they were going to zag, because that's what they had talked about doing. So for me, it's about sort of drawing them into making choices and doing things very quickly. And for me, that's where I think that you should spend sort of the biggest chunk of your session prep time. Is in sort of that very first scene or encounter. How are you going to start the session? Because that's going to kind of set the tone for the entire session. And it doesn't necessarily need to be combat, right? But it could be a combat. It could be a chase. It could be a new clue that they're coming through, or a plot revelation. Or it could be if you're running out of ideas and you're like, I don't know, what am I going to do? Like, using the example I said before, like they literally just went to sleep. I have no idea what they're going to do in the morning. And you're like, okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to start the session off with them like down in the tavern portion of the inn having their breakfast, and this out of breath NPC is going to crash through the door asking for their help about something, maybe related to the adventure, maybe not related to the adventure, but something that's going to spur them immediately into action, and they don't have to figure out what they're going to do in the game. I'm going to tell them how they're going to start the game, and then they can figure out what they're going to do for the rest of the session. The idea is to just get the players very quickly into the game, into character, get them taking actions and making decisions and rolling dice. So that's really what I want out of a purposeful start. So that's the sort of thing that you look for, that I look for every session that started off. So I'm going to spend the bulk of my prep time, sort of the lion's share there, because part of that is that first I want to make it really memorable, right? We talked about it. We kind of want to start it with a bang, being like, so if we, like, for example, we just played, I just said that we just played a session, and we ended the session looking at this mutated sort of cephalopod mutant person that we just gotten into a fight with, kind of surprised us, and we ended up killing it. So a good place would be to end at the end of the combat, and then if you want to do a very purposeful start, rather than starting with them, finishing their rest, a short rest or whatever they were going to do, be like, no, you're going to start by investigating the cephalopod. Like, just start the session being like, you're all sitting around this creature, looking at it, and taking an interest in it and trying to figure out information because you've never seen anything like this before. Oh, hi from Germany. Nice. Bit of a time difference. Hope you're having a good day. My day's been pretty good. We're just kind of going over some session prep stuff specifically for D&D, but it's very general information for any tabletop RPG, and just sort of a look at some of what I do to prep, and this is a little worksheet I have for myself to prep. So yeah, just jump in if you have any questions about anything like that, or comments, anything. We're just having fun this evening, or at least it's evening for me. So yeah, that's sort of step 2 of the 7 steps. Is trying to make sure that you have a good way to start. So we want it to be memorable, right? That's what I talked about. So that's why I want to put a lot of the emphasis there. It's also, I want to spend a lot of the emphasis there on prep for the next session, the very first scene or encounter that they're going to have, because realistically, that's the only encounter we can ensure actually happens, right? Because D&D is a decision tree, and right, the strength and the weakness of D&D is that the players can decide to do anything at any time, or at least attempt to try to do anything at any time. Oh, you're 2:40 a.m. I'm sorry, that's the worst. Well, hopefully, hopefully you can get some extra sleep and sort of catch up on that. So we want to specifically sort of. I just lost my train of thought. What does it say? Oh, because that's the only encounter that we know is going to happen for them. because they can decide to go anywhere from there. So I want to spend the most time there instead of prepping sessions that or scenes or encounters that may or may not happen or may need to be improvised or changed on the fly based off of what the players decide to do and how they decide to approach things. So that's number two. That's what I would say is probably the most intensive sort of prep portion, and then that leads just kind of straight into our number three here, which is basically to our step three is basically outline the most likely scenes or encounters that we think we're going to do. Like we said, we only really know with a purposeful start that they're going to do that one scene or encounter. So after that, we're just kind of guessing. Now, it's a little bit different if you're running, say, like a very classic dungeon adventure. Like, you know where they're going to start, what room they're going to start in, you know what rooms are around them. That gives you a pretty good idea of limitations, right? A dungeon imposes limitations, which helps with prep a lot because you know all the possibilities because you're really shrinking down the world. But if you're running a more sort of contemporary D&D adventure that's not a dungeon crawler, then you need to be a little bit more flexible as to what can happen. Especially if you're doing a very sort of like plot intensive thing. So if you're doing sort of whether that's D&D or another game, if you're doing a very sort of investigation or exploration mystery kind of thing where there are clues, there are things to find, there are things to encounter, puzzles, things to figure out, it's very easy then to not know what to prep because you might prep something like a puzzle and be like, oh yeah, they'll figure out that puzzle, and then they'll spend 30 minutes on it and be like, we don't know the puzzle, let's go do something else. And you're like, oh, but I prepped the scene and encounter from the clue that you get from the puzzle, so now you guys won't get there. So that prep's not going to be useful for this session. And now you guys are going to something that I wasn't prepared for, which is going to happen anyways. Honestly, they're going to do. Players are crazy. They're going to do stuff that you don't expect. Right? They're going to make weird conclusions. They're going to make, and those conclusions sometimes are right. They're sometimes wrong. But they don't know the difference. Only you know the difference of that, and so you don't really know which way they're going to go a lot of the times. So one of the things I start off first when I'm thinking about, okay, maybe if I need a few more of the most likely scenes that are gonna kind of come up. First thing I think about is like, okay, what are the sort of two states for the end of the first encounter? Okay, they succeed in that first encounter. What do I think they would do next? Based off of my players, based off of their characters, based off of the adventure, I can make a pretty decent guess as to, okay, if they succeed here, or maybe they get a little piece of information, what they're going to do with that information next. So I can kind of be like, okay, so that's a second scene to prep. And then I would do the same for maybe failure. Be like, okay, maybe they get chased off by the goblins, or they totally bungle the rolls and they end up tampering with the evidence and investigation, and now the gumshoes can't use that information, so now they're in a failure state. Where do I think that they would go to next if they lost this critical piece of information? So if I do that, that's going to give me three of the most likely to happen scenes, right? We're going to have the first one, and then what I think would happen if they succeed, and what I think is most likely to happen if they fail. Oh yes, running a sandbox game is a different sort of breed. Yeah. And then they put that fault on you for not having a goal because, yeah, you're saying that definitely with the sandbox game, one of the reasons sandbox games work with sort of older, especially sort of, I feel like players that are really interested in like OSR and older editions of D&D, is that it's a different mindset for a player. You have to have a personal goal. You have to have a goal for your character, something that you want to achieve, and most of old D&D is using the dungeons and adventures to get honestly capital that you need to do whatever you want, whether that's to become a merchant or set up your own stronghold or do anything like that. Like those are character goals, and a lot of contemporary D&D doesn't force players to have strong character goals. You are, pieces in an overarching plot. And so yeah, if you try to take players from that and then try to dump them into a character driven sandbox, that very often happens where the players are like, I don't know what to do. We don't have any direction. Why don't you give us anything to do? This seems like a bad game. You did a bad job. And it's no, but it's a very different type of play style. So yeah, it can be very frustrating, for sure. Both as a DM or a GM and a player, I feel like. So as far as we have our basically our three scenes that I think, and then I could kind of deduce from that. Okay, what is the next piece of clue or information I want to give them, or thing that I want them to encounter, and that just kind of steamrolls. And honestly, there's nothing you could really there's no really quick shortcut or knowledge base way to do that. It's very much experience, and it's knowing your players and the adventuring party. So if they're interested in fighting, you should probably put some more combats in there, so that kind of gives you an idea of what sort of encounters to prep. If they have one or two very social focused characters, then you're going to want some sort of intrigue or people they can talk to and maybe bribe or convince or persuade or intimidate, right? Do those sorts of things to kind of give them those opportunities as well. But altogether, I basically have here. You can see it, right? We talk about engaging all three pillars, making sure that you kind of have that mix, and then how we do sort of scene outlines for me, and that's when I try to figure out how many things to prep in the game, so I don't really over prep. I kind of use that 25 minutes plus 5 minutes for each PC, because that's kind of about how long a scene takes for the players to kind of get through and fully sort of manage their way through. And obviously that's an average. It's going to change depending on the scene and the nature of it and what happens during it. But it's really useful. So if I know that if I'm going to run a duet D&D session, say, so there's only one player, and I know we're going to play for 2 hours. I'm like, all right, well, it's 25 minutes of scene plus 5 for each PC. There's only one PC, so that's 30 minutes. So I know that I need to prep about 4 encounters or scenes is really all I need to do. Anything beyond that's kind of over prepping, especially if you're not running a dungeon, so you don't really know the direction they're going to take. I'd say if you want to be safe, prep one more than you think you need, one more encounter than you think you would need based off of that. And that's if you want to be sort of extra prepared. And that may just be kind of a throwaway scene where you're just like, this is an aside thing that I can use for maybe like some padding if they end up rushing through a couple of scenes and I need to sort of stretch things out to make the whole session time. Then you can do something like that. Or if things are happening really quick and you need to go, you can just kind of toss that one to the side because it's not super important to the actual overall adventure that you're running. They didn't have, yeah. If they don't have any backstory, if your players are showing up with characters without any backstory, and you're trying to run a very heavily character driven campaign, yeah, there's gonna be some problems with that for sure. Right, and so I'm sure you probably learned a little bit from that is that if I have players that aren't super into doing backstories and doing a lot of character development, maybe I want to run a more sort of like beer and pretzel style kind of game because that's maybe what they're looking for. Where it's more like, okay, I prep a dungeon, they kick in doors, they slay monsters, they get loot, they have a good time, they roll dice. That's fun. So you kind of have to obviously as you play with people, you'll learn more about their tendencies of what they tend to enjoy in the game. And if you don't know, you can always ask, right? Though people generally aren't super great about knowing what they like and don't like. That is unfortunately a problem, a full human being problem, that we're just not really good at understanding what we do like and what we don't like. We think we know, but we're actually not very good at it. But as an outside observer, you'll have a better understanding that through experience of playing with them. But that can be really hard, especially with new people who are either new to the hobby or it's maybe your first time playing with them and running with them. Yeah, and unfortunately, it's a lot of hits and misses until you figure that out for sure. So what I want to do is after I have sort of the know how many encounters I want to prep, of these most likely to happen encounters or scenes, then I'll write up some bullet points for them. General description that's for the location. So a general description, some sort of piece of sensory flair or detail about the scene, and then sort of give bullet points for the things that are actually in the location from what I think is the least to greatest importance. Because I want to end that with the thing that they're most likely to act upon once I'm done telling them, setting the scene for them. And then, right, I want to talk about like the challenges or obstacles that are in front of them, the exits to the location, right? If you're in a room, like where the exits are for the room, and what seems to be sort of like the obvious goal for the party in the room. Which, if you drop a whole bunch of monsters in the room, then it's going to be, defeating the monsters in the room usually. Or if you want to set up like a puzzle or something like that, that's what you would want to end on. And then track down any other additional notes that I have, right? About what DCs I need, stat blocks for monsters, what NPCs, and some details about them that I think will be in the scene. If there's going to be any loot, what is the loot, what's it worth, and where is it in the room. So if they go searching for that, that's especially important if you're going to do sort of like hidden loot or things like chests with false bottoms and things like that. You're going to want those notes so you remember how it's hidden, because players will ask questions trying to find it. Um, yeah, I mean that's most of sort of what that scene is. It's a lot of it's it's kind of a cognitive load for you as a DM, right? Because there's a lot of stuff you have to figure out in this step or try to guess in this step, which is the point of prep, right? Is try to guess as much as we can. But it's the work you actually need to do for this step is very simple, right? Think about the encounters that come up. Go, okay, make up some details about that encounter. So it's simple work, but it is something you kind of have to think about and try to prepare yourself for. And there's, of course, you're going to have lots of misses, some hits, right? It also depends, right? It's actual play at the table, and no prep survives contact with the party at the table. So you try to figure out, what are you going to do here, right? That's really what you're going to try to figure out. A puzzle that must be solved so the monsters don't spawn anymore. Yeah, I've actually run some of those before. Very sort of old school, like the Gauntlet video game, kind of monster spawn points. Yeah, I've done some of those before. Those are really fun to do with like elementals or maybe sort of like fairy rings or something like that that's bringing sort of like extra planar things in. Because it's a little weird to just have a random door that maybe like human guards keep spawning out of. That would be a little weird in a dungeon, but definitely have spawning things that sort of like summoning circles and things like that that sort of summon creatures from other realms or other areas is very useful too. Or if you want to, you can even do something like if you want to do vermin or spiders or something like that, and be like, oh, you like they're going to keep pouring out of this hole until you figure out a way to sort of plug up this hole or stop the area where they can actually enter the scene. But yeah, those are a lot of fun. They're definitely a different way to play. You have to telegraph the information about that a lot with players, because D&D is kind of weird because we tend to think about D&D as a player as being very sort of simulationist because that's our understanding of the world, whereas doing something like a monster spawner is very video game esque, and not a thing that if you're in the headspace of, oh, I'm a real person who inhabits a real world, you may not be thinking along video game logic, right? So you have to telegraph to make it extremely clear that this thing is going to keep summoning creatures and build that up slowly, or else they'll get swarmed and unfortunately die or have to run away. So yeah, that's step 3 is we're getting through the extra scenes. So step 4 is what I call sort of interscene fluff in the interactions. I try to prep about 5 to 7 of these per session. And the nice thing about this step is that once you do it once, as long as you're still in basically the same area, so whether that's a dungeon or they're exploring the wilderness or, traveling over land or hanging around in the city, is that I only need to replace whatever I use for the next session. Because if I do this sort of correctly, in that I set up, sort of small things that should happen in an area like that, interactions that should happen in an area like that, then I don't need to change them each session when I'm redoing prep. I just swap out the ones that I haven't used yet, or swap out the ones I have used. And really, sort of the purpose of this is that they're little moments or interactions. I use them for pacing for a session, so I can use them to sort of fill time if I need to fill time, and I can use them as sort of transitions, sort of interactions between sort of larger scenes. So instead of just, going bang, bang, bang with encounters or scenes, you can kind of put a little break here, and that helps you kind of control sort of the tension and pacing of things, which is really, really helpful. And of course, if you don't need to do it because for whatever reason, maybe you're running behind, so you don't want to add extra stuff to the game, or things are building tension appropriately because there's like a big fight coming or something like that, then you don't have to worry about that. Then you don't put those things in, right? They're just kind of sitting in reserve for you to pick up whenever you need them. That's kind of the point. That's why they're fluff. They're non-essential things that you kind of pull in. So examples of this would be sort of like dungeon or wilderness dressing. You can have NPC talking points or questions. That's something that I do if the party has like hirelings, or you're using sort of the new sidekick rules in Tasha's Cauldron of Everything for like 5e. And so they have a sidekick with them that kind of takes over kind of a party role, but not really, or is maybe just kind of there for their expertise, or just because you want an NPC that maybe can actually hold their own a little bit in a fight, so you don't want them immediately killed. Uh, one things that I like to do with them is like give them talking points or questions to ask the party or specific people in the party, which is kind of fun. Just kind of build that sort of role play interaction in sort of an organic sense. Those are always fun, or have them do something that's very characteristic for them. For example, I had an NPC that was going with a party, and he was sort of like an amateur archaeologist. And so they came across these old dwarven machines, and he's like, no. And he made the party like stop so he could like sketch them out in his drawing pad so he could have them for later, and like take some small like nuts and bolts that he could use as like samples or examples of the thing that he had found, which is lots of fun. Right, and that just sort of kills time a little bit, or gives the party something else to do other than just sort of the major fights or encounters of a dungeon or adventure. Kind of gives them a break on stuff, which is really helpful if you've been running like 2 or 3, pretty high tension scenes, and you want to give them sort of a break, sort of break a dip in that tension, sort of like pressure release valve, because you feel like they need it, or because the resolution for what they're trying to build to, they're building too early or something like that. Kind of helps do that, and kind of gives you the up and down, which is what you want, right? You want an ebb and flow of tension and drama in the game if you're running a very heavy plot style kind of game or investigation or things like that. So anything that we include with this has got to be non-critical or is completely unrelated to the adventure. And that's because at any point the players can just nope out of this interaction. So if I did, so talking using the example that I had earlier, if you had an NPC that stopped to sort of sketch this ancient dwarven machine, players could just keep on going. They could be like, "Yeah, that's nice," and just keep on going. And that's happening, and you can just let that happen if you want to, or you can have a fun interaction where it's they keep walking, and then you use passive perception checks or have everybody sort of roll a perception or something like that, and then whoever rolls the highest realizes that this vital NPC isn't with the party anymore as they're running through the dungeon or across the city or whatever, and they're like, wait, and they have like sort of a lost child at the amusement park moment where they're like, "Oh God, where's our NPC? Were they kidnapped? Did they just wander off?" And so they can run around and try to find them, and that could be fun too. Oh yeah, so if your players were expecting sort of a high fantasy epic kind of thing, and you wanted to run a more sort of more grounded low fantasy adventure, yeah, they dissolved through Corona. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I know I lost a gaming group due to the COVID as well, so I fully understand. Yeah, it's setting expectations. Session zeros are really helpful for that if you can do it, or if you can't sit down to do a session zero, to at least kind of give them a little like primer, give them a little primer for what kind of game you want to run. And I find it's helpful to give them sort of like an appendix in kind of references or resources that kind of help them understand the mood and tone of the game you're going for. So they're not expecting Lord of the Rings, and you're like, hey, but I really want something that's maybe a little bit more, maybe like The Witcher rather than the Lord of the Rings. And then if you're able to give them that, and they're able to, whether or not they played the games or watched the show, but they can at least like look at some of the art or see trailers and things like that, that'll help them kind of, okay, I kind of understand this game, the world that we're going to be in. I kind of understand the tone of the game, and I have a better idea about what kind of character to make and how that character would fit into the world. So that can be really helpful too. So another thing that's really really useful for the sort of interscene fluff and interactions is, in addition to sort of controlling the pace and giving sort of breaks and things like that in sort of tension, they're also really really useful for what I call unstucking the party. So if you run games, you'll run into this occasionally, where the players won't be able to make a decision about what they want to do next or where they want to go, and then they start sort of having a circular conversation about it, where they keep bringing up the same points and things like that. That's the time for you to sort of do these little in- injections. Really, there's a there's some old screenwriting advice that talks about, like, if you don't know what to do with the scene, have a guy walk in the door with a gun. It's like you provide some sort of impulse, like shake up the situation, and that usually is enough to get them moving or get them to be like, we'll talk about this later, or we'll figure it out later. Let's go do something else, or figure out where these random monsters were coming from, or things like that. That can be really really helpful too. Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's just tough playing being a new DM, and being a new player and DM is really difficult, especially if you're going to jump into the driver's seat with much more experienced players, like people with 10 years of experience, like you're talking about. Um, yeah, that can be really difficult. Again, it depends a lot on the group, especially if they're a cohesive group. That's really hard to jump into and DM. It's a little bit easier, I feel like, if you have experienced players, but they're not experienced with each other. So they're a lot more open to sort of giving you some slack or help as they need to. But sometimes, right, an already well meshed group that's been playing together for a long time, and somebody new comes in and they do things that are different to what they've done in the past and as they've expected in the past, then they're like, oh, this is different. This is not what I want. And then whether intentional or not, they can make you kind of feel bad about that. But you just have to remember that they're kind of a group that's been playing together for a while, can get stuck in a rut. They have a specific type of game that they like to play, and that's why they play together, and that's why they play together for so long. It's because they have a very comfortable spot that they're sitting in. And the best thing you could do is try to get some information out of them before you run the game for them. To be like, tell me a little bit about the games you really enjoyed in the past, or something like that. If you do something like that, you can sort of start to understand the sort of games that they play and the sort of characters that they enjoy playing. And so I would expect, I can't say for sure, but I expect in your situation, talking about that before kind of running your game, then you would get the idea, oh, they're really interested in like a much more high fantasy epic kind of style of game, where they're doing all these, big cool things, and magic's really big and powerful and kind of all over the place. And you'll be like, okay, so then maybe they're not going to gel super great if I turn the needle to the other way and I start giving them sort of this low fantasy feel. I mean, if they're open to it, that's also great. But right, communication is really key there, and setting the expectation that, hey, this is the kind of game that I'm going to run. If you guys are cool with that, if you're interested in playing in that, this is sort of the game that I want to run. I know it's not maybe exactly what you guys are used to, but I hope you guys will give it a chance. So that can be kind of helpful too. So yeah, as far as Interscene Fluff, that's about it. You're kind of controlling pacing. You're using it to sort of break up the bigger sessions, right? Nobody. It's really difficult to play a D&D game and go from like, especially in sort of higher level stuff. If you're having like a 30 or 45 minute combat encounter, to then turn around and go almost immediately into another, right? People are like, I need a break. So things like the Fluff are really helpful for that, and of course, unstucking a party if they get caught not knowing what to do, or things like that. Kind of help them, kind of give them a prod in the right direction to doing something in the scene. And that's step 5, which is the big 5. That's sort of the end of the sort of big, or sorry, step 5 is going to be the end of sort of the major prepping part. And this part of prep, actually, the most important thing is actually the, right, you guys can see that? Yeah. Is what you do at the end of a session. Because good prep, I feel like, starts at the end of a session. So this is helpful, like, because I use the session sheet. If I filled out the worksheet, I have it with me when I'm running the game. So I know when I'm getting down towards the end of the sheet, I go, oh, right, at the wrap up, I need to ask these questions and do these things. So the first thing is the important thing, right? To make sure that we have that purposeful, strong start, we have to know what the players are going to do. And what we want them to do is make a choice as to what they're going to do. Like I talked about the cephalopod person, and that would be sort of injecting a scene there if they don't give you a really good choice, or maybe they say something vague like, we're going to investigate the scene, or loot the body or something like that. You're like, okay, loot the body's not really a whole scene, so how about investigating the thing? And so that's sort of your purposeful start there. But the first thing I want to do at the end of the session, I want to confirm with the players what they're doing next. What are you doing next? So I know what to prep. And this is them, they're locking it in at this point. They're being, yes, this is what we're doing next time. And so, okay, that's what I'm going to prep, and that's where we're going to start. So if you say you're ending with them staying at the inn, you're like, okay, well, you guys are going to rest in the inn overnight. What are you going to do the next day? What's the first thing you're going to do? And they might, quibble about it a little bit, but maybe they're like, okay, we're going to go to the blacksmith to see if he can make a something out of these dragon scales that we have. Okay, well, now I know the first scene. And so when it comes to start that next session, the purposeful start is I just start them at the blacksmith shop, right? There's no getting up and then you change your mind and go somewhere else. It's like, no, you guys got up, you had breakfast, you're starting at the blacksmith shop now that, and it's opening, and now the blacksmith's there and ready to talk to you. So kind of right, using that purposeful start to immediately jump you into the situation. All right, start talking because this person's waiting on you. So that's the first kind of step thing that we want to do in our 3-step sort of session wrap up. I want to know exactly what they're going to do next time. And like I said, if they don't choose something or they're kind of vague about it, I'm going to make a choice for them. I prefer that they make the choice, right? I don't want to feel like I'm taking agency away from them. But if they don't give me a very strong answer, I can't make a very strong start, right? So I'll make the purposeful start for them by doing my best guess as to narrowing down what some sort of vague thing might mean. Like if they say I want to go shopping, okay, well you're going to start at this shop and that's what you're going to be working on. Right, that's immediately where we're going to start. The second step is I kind of do after we've sort of wrapped up, everybody's sort of at that point, packing up their gaming supplies or whatever, is I want to make post-session adjustments to my countdown timers. So if you haven't used countdown timers before, it basically uses the very standard 6 different dice types, going from 4 all the way up to D20. And what I use them for is that I have a list of timers, these are sort of background things that are happening. They're plots or consequences of actions that the players have done previously. There's things that the villains are doing, moves they're making, backstory elements for the player characters. Basically anything notable that's happening in the game world off screen from where the party is. And so basically I'll start with a high die size. I might start with a 10 or a 12 or, well, actually, usually what I do, if I'm being really honest, is that I start with a D4, and then as I add more things to the queue, I use higher dice sizes. And the idea is that whenever you're checking these countdown timers, you roll the die size it is. If you roll a 1, it goes down to the next die size. And so obviously if you're at a 1d4 and you roll a 1, the tracker just goes down to 1, which means in one session, this thing is going to come up. Maybe not immediately, but basically this thing is going to come up at the soonest opportunity that makes sense for it to work into the world. So if I have a backstory element that I want to do with, say, a player character's brother, and I'm like, okay, well, I rolled a d4, I got a 1, so what I know is that after this next session, something's going to happen with the brother. They're either going to show up to talk to the PC, or they're going to send a letter, or they're going to get some news about them in some way. Now, usually I've planned out a little bit more, so I might be the brother has probably a very specific reason for contacting them, or some very specific things going to happen to the brother, and I know that already. And then I just look for the opportunity in which to bring it up in the game and sort of interject it, so it's something they deal with. And that's sort of step 2. So I'll go through the timers and roll the dice and, everything will kind of move down the chute towards showing up in the game. And I find it is a very helpful way to sort of remember to incorporate things like backstories from player characters to make, things happen for them, for each of the individual players. So they each have maybe a backstory countdown timer. It's also nice if they maybe didn't neatly tie up a previous adventure, like maybe they had some loose strings that were left. Well, maybe have a countdown timer. Maybe the bad guy got away, so there's a countdown timer for the bad guy from the last adventure that they didn't capture or kill. That bad guy's going to do something, and he's going to, they're going to rear their head again back into the play session, and people are going to be like, "Oh God, this guy again." And then give them a feeling about, okay, well, we got to deal with this once we're done dealing with whatever we're dealing now, or maybe maybe that's going to interject in the middle of whatever they're trying to do. Right? It kind of depends on whatever you set up for those countdown timers. And you don't really actually need to know what's going to happen with those countdown timers till I'd say probably a D6 or a D4. At that point, I need to start figuring out what's actually going to happen because it's probably going to happen in a few sessions. So it helps for me to like start thinking about, okay, here's what's going to happen, I think. And then my last part of sort of the session wrap up is that I review my notes from the game, and then I go ahead and make the session recap for the next session. I think I try to do it whenever I'm fresh, whenever I've got like when I'm thinking about just after the sessions when I try to do it. I'll spend 10-15 minutes just writing out bullet points. Okay, they went here and they did this. They had that funny interaction. Oh, you know, player character C got knocked out during that fight and right then failed 2 death saves, and they thought, oh man, they're really gonna die, but they were able to scrape by, have that sort of stuff ready. So I'm not in the same situation that my players are going to be in a week or 2 weeks or a month or whenever it is. Also going, actually, what did happen last session? Right? I would obviously they're going to think that because we, as dungeon masters and game masters, we spend a lot more time on the game and with the inner workings of the game and the plots and the adventures and player characters than our players do. Right? They think about it. If you have really really good players, they think about it in between sessions, but a lot of them don't, or at least don't think a lot about it. So that's important to sort of think about. I want to be prepared because I know they're not going to be super prepared. Oh yeah, countdown timers, they're really fun. I don't, I can't remember where they first came across countdown timers. I want to say maybe Powered by the Apocalypse. Somebody did a sort of a fork of their sort of fronts system. I think maybe. But yeah, I find countdown timers a lot of fun because it's sort of the idea is that something's going to happen eventually. I just don't know when, and the players don't know when, if they know it's going to happen at all. So they're a lot of fun. They kind of inject a little bit of randomness that kind of helps it feel a little bit more like a living world, right? That things are happening in the background, which is really, really helpful to sort of like sell the immersion in the world. Be like, oh, by the way, while you were out, this thing happened in town, and then people are like, oh god. And it's not always bad. Sorry, I made it sound like countdown timers are always bad things. Countdown timers are sometimes good things. I don't want them to always be bad things. Sometimes it's like, oh, we saved this random NPC from a dungeon. We saved this random NPC for a dungeon. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to set like a D8 timer, and then when it counts down to 0, this person's going to show up and help you. I think at some point, they're going to show back up in in the narrative, and they'll be like, maybe when I'll look for like a point in time where they really are really struggling with something, and then maybe this NPC is going to show up and help them. They'll be like, "Hey, you're the girl from the place," and she'll be like, "Yeah." And now we're square. I just paid you back. Oh, I haven't tried throwing the countdown. Well, I have done countdown timers in the middle of the game. I prefer to do it in between sessions though, so that way it gives me a little bit of time to prep to try to find a natural place. Um, Otherwise, it can get really random. I expect. So that's step 5, and that's sort of the core 5 steps that I use for sort of session prep. And sort of 6 and 7 are sort of what I kind of call bonus prep stuff. Let me pull this down so we can see this all together. Yeah. So sort of the step 6 for me is bonus DM prep. This is where I talked about in the beginning, sort of like having those handouts and tactile resources. Like you don't want to make a handout for an encounter if you don't know what's going to happen, and then you make this, or worse yet, you make the handout, but then you haven't actually prepped the encounter it's supposed to go to because you spent all your time making the handout. That's why this stuff for me is like at the back. It's like, okay, I knew what they were going to do in the next session. I got a pretty good idea. And so I rushed through this, or like I ended up with a little bit of extra time this week to prep. So I'm like, okay, well, let me think about some maps to use. Maybe I'll pull out some specific miniatures if I have time. Maybe there's a specific music track that I want to use for this dungeon, or maybe I want to load a specific sound effect for like a specific bad guy. Maybe I want them to have like a very specific like monster sound or something like that I can use that I can sort of load up. So that's what I kind of think of as step six, is sort of bonus prep things. They're what I think of as sort of gameplay enhancers. I usually don't spend a lot of time on music or sound effects in the front unless I have, like I said, maybe I have a monster that I want a very specific sound for. Then I may pull it a little bit earlier, but that's pretty rare. And I mean that's it. Those are just bonus prep things for that. And that's these two, step six and step seven, are a little bit different. So step six is obviously specifically about things to enhance the stuff that I've already prepped. So if I want to give them like a tactile resource, if I want to give them like I want to make a puzzle that they have to solve, well, maybe I get like a very cheap like little puzzle box or something like that, and be like, okay, here, go solve that. That's what you got to do. And once you solve it, I will let you know what happens next. They can kind of give them something to do, something that kind of challenge the players, not just their characters, which can be kind of fun. And it's something that, right, one or two of your your group can kind of noodle on while somebody's having a social interaction or doing shopping or something like that. Especially if you have a party that likes to split up a lot, you can give that other side something to work on in the meantime. And then step seven is what I call sort of improvisation tools. You know, I have prepped everything that I think is reasonable to prep for the next session. If I have some leftover time, these are the sort of things I'll look to update. And again, these are things that I don't need to update between every session. They work kind of like the Interscene Fluff, is that I really only need to replace them once I use them. So for me, improvisation tools that I have sort of listed out here, I have drop-in NPCs and a names list, and oh, there it is. Let's see. So this is my DM's binder. I know I've shown this off before. But speaking of it, that's actually what's in this pocket right here, are these drop-in NPCs and names. So it's just like if I decide that I need an NPC for something, and they want to know more about that NPC for whatever reason, if they think it's important, then I can just grab one of these NPCs and use them. They're kind of built generically to kind of drop into whatever situation I need them to be in. So they're kind of just sort of, some basic physical details, some basic mannerisms, and that's about it. They've got a name, and that's about it. So if I need them to be a forester, they could be a forester. They could be a shopkeeper if they need to be a shopkeeper. They can be a constable if they need to be a constable, right? They can kind of easily drop into any of these situations. Especially if this ends up being sort of an NPC that they're going to come back to multiple times. So it's a lot of fun. And right, I only need to replace them when I use one of them, which that's very. How often you need to improvise NPCs is really, I feel like, dependent on the group. I know a lot of the groups that I've had a history playing with over many, many years rarely ask anything about the NPCs. Like I said, we were just playing a game earlier in the week, and we just realized that we had gone through, half a session, maybe more, with this one NPC, and we hadn't asked the NPC what their name was. We're like, oh yeah, we should probably ask you your name. So that's definitely how I feel a lot of players kind of treat NPCs. They're like, yeah, you're here to tell me about the plot, about the adventure, right? It's not about you. It's about me. I'm the main character. Why would I learn your name? But you know, you'll have those sort of NPCs or characters that, especially minor ones, that groups tend to latch on to for whatever reason they really like or they really like to hate. And so it can be helpful to, if you need to, grab something like one of those drop-in NPCs and kind of use them to flesh out that character a little bit more if they take either a liking or a disliking to it. So yeah, I have NPCs set up. I also do sort of location relevant random encounter tables. Usually it's like a D6 table. I just have like 6 different sort of small sort of encounters that can happen. And this is also useful. You can use sort of random encounters to roll for. It took me a long time to come around to random encounters, to be honest. And I know a lot of people don't like them. And then I got a better understanding because contemporary D&D doesn't really tell you anything, or D&D and other D20 or just modern RPGs really in general don't really tell you why you would use random encounters or wandering monsters. And so people just kind of implement them willy-nilly or just use them and be like, oh, we haven't had a fight in a while, so here's a fight, even though it's not important to the adventure. But once I learned a little bit more about the original intention for them and how they were used, I was like, oh, this makes sense. I'm definitely going to include these in my game. These are great. And so, like I said, like we said with the Interscene Fluff, these can be used to sort of unstuck parties or to kind of screw tension onto parties for a situation. If you've watched sort of Matt Colville or looked at some of his stuff before, he uses the term in one of his videos, Orcs Attack, and it's basically the same idea. Is that the idea of like wandering monsters in a dungeon is basically the more time that you guys spend screwing around in a dungeon, the more likely it is that a monster is going to find you and you're going to have to fight again. And that made sense in older editions of D&D where most of the time you don't want to fight. Fighting is really dangerous and you'll die, and you don't want to do that. But that cannot be what happens in contemporary D&D, right? People want to fight, right? That's sort of a highlight of modern D&D and other D20 systems is the combat encounter. But having them just sort of reinforcing that this is not a place to hang around. This is not a safe place to rest. You need to figure out whatever you want to do, and you want to do it as quickly as possible. If you're going to spend a lot of time looking for hidden passages and secret loot and looting every body and looking under every rug, right, you're going to end up doing a lot more combats, a lot more monster encounters than you plan to do. So that's what they're really useful for. And so that's once I kind of came to that realization, I was like, oh yeah, well I should make random encounter tables all the time. And then basically it's a 1d6 table. Every time that I use something on the table, again, I just replace whatever I used. Pretty simple. In addition to that, yeah, plot twist: the NPC betrays the PCs because they don't even know his name. Yeah, no, definitely, yeah. I could definitely see starting off a campaign where they, with a group of PCs that kind of treat a very early NPC like dirt, and then have that NPC have their own sort of off-screen I became a player character arc. And they gain levels and they find party, and other people that are pissed off about adventurers and the way that they treat normal people, and kind of become sort of like either a rival party or a big bad in their own way. It'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. So yeah, encounter tables. I also do sort of tiny loot packages or pocket contents, and that's also sort of in my DM's binder too. And so I'll roll up some of those because I know if you kill something, right? If you have players that kill something, they're like, yeah, but we got any loot on it? So I like to have sort of the pocket contents or tiny loot packages to sort of reward that. They're not like big rewards, but they're like, yeah, you rifle through this dead person's pocket and you find some coins and uh, that a little pouch full of peanuts that they were eating as a snack. Oh, okay. It's also a great way to sort of inject clues if they need a little helping hand in the dungeon and be like, oh, yeah, you come across a scrap of paper that says FY7. FY7. And then, if they had a puzzle or a code or passcode or something that they've been struggling with, you can literally just give them the answer to it. If it's, getting to the point where it's barring their advancement in sort of the plot in sort of a dungeon or adventure, and be like, oh, this guy was a real dummy and he couldn't remember the passcode, so he wrote it down. And then we killed him, and now we know the passcode. Right? It's the same thing when people write down their passwords for their computers or things like that. And then like put it on a sticky note next to their desk. It's like, oh, well, now I have your passcode. And I use tiny loot packages basically sometimes as rewards for the group. If somebody's like, oh, I want to check if this desk, if one of the drawers has a false bottom in it. They'd be like, oh, well, I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, sure. And if they maybe roll really well, I'll be like, oh, yeah, it does. You open it up and it's got, some little sack of coins or maybe a gemstone or something like that, a piece of jewelry or a stamp, or maybe, like I said, with the pocket contents, maybe it has a clue. Right? Maybe that's where they put their computer password, right? Is in the false bottom on a sticky note. It's like if you take the time to find the false bottom, then yeah, you'll have access to it and you won't have to try to, hack into this computer, hack the passcode to get into the computer. This is really fun. And then sort of the last part for improvisation tools is what I call the parachute file. And that's basically 1 to 3 relevant one-shot adventures that I can use if the players kind of go off rails, like go far afield. And I've got some of those actually in here as well. There are a lot of the internet is just absolutely full of basically one-page adventures, like one-page one-shots for, I mean, obviously primarily for D&D, but also there are a number of them for they're things that could be easily adapted to other fantasy RPGs, and there are some resources, though obviously lesser as far as free is kind of concerned, of the same sort of nature for other genres of tabletop RPGs that you can kind of use. And if you do a little bit of work like changing out the stat blocks and things like that, and changing DCs or target numbers, or the number of successes you need to roll on a dice pool, if you change up those things, you can use those very easily. And so what I like to do is I kind of have a bank of them. It's pretty easy to build up over time. And there are a lot of resources that you can get. There's like, oh, here's like 61-page dungeons that you can download very easily. And then you can kind of build up a bank of your own to kind of use. And so I try to pick, 3 relative level appropriate one-shot adventures, one-page adventures that work in basically the same area. So if, say, again, it's D&D. We'll use D&D as an example. It's the most common. It's the big granddaddy of RPGs, right? And let's say that you have a party and they're traveling through the hills and they're supposed to go to this one location, but they get really, maybe you use one of those Interscene Fluff, and then they really like latch onto that like it's an adventure hook. And you're like, oh, well, now they're following this, and now they're like completely on a tangent from where they're supposed to be going. You're like, okay, that's cool. Well, I have back here in my parachute file, I have a few different adventures I can use. I've got one that's kind of tracking through things through the highlands, through the hillsides. I've got one that's maybe like a ruined keep or something that's on a hill. Okay. And maybe I have another one that's about like maybe like a river, or maybe like an enchanted little copse of woods, right? A small little woodland that's got maybe like Fey touch or something like that, has some fairy stuff going on. And if I have those in my back pocket and I understand, okay, maybe they were following this random bird that was acting very strange and kind of seemed almost like it was communicating with them, but maybe they don't have anybody in the party that can speak with animals. and so they're just kind of following it. They're like, oh, well, we're gonna follow it and see where it goes because it seems like it's communicating with it. I'm like, okay, and I might look through my open up my adventures in the back real quick and be like, okay. Well, I could take him to the ruined tower, right? Maybe it's like an old magic tower. Maybe this is a familiar for somebody, or a mage or something. I could do that. Or maybe I want to take them to the enchanted woodland. Maybe this is not an actually a bird. It's like some sort of polymorphed sprite or fairy, or maybe it's like some sort of cursed fey creature that's been trapped in the body of an animal or something like that. And I can kind of weave those together pretty easily with improvisation, right? And kind of get them started on this little adventure. And the idea and why I use sort of specifically one shot or like one page adventures is that I don't want this. I want if they go off on the tangent, that's fine. What I don't want them to do is spend 5 sessions following a tangent when they're supposed to be doing something else, right? They've been hired to do something else. They're in the middle of a different adventure, and then they take a hard left and go this way. Well, I want to give them. If they decide to do that, that's fine, right? That's sort of the strength of D&D. Are there consequences of maybe not going directly there and doing that? Maybe, right? It kind of depends on whatever adventure you've set up and that you're running. And if that's the case, for me, I add that to the countdown timers, and I'll sort of bump it up towards the top, right? I want it a lower dice size. Be like, okay, well, if you guys decided not to go save these townspeople, so in 1d6 sessions, however many it takes me to get down to it, they're all going to be dead, and you're not going to get there. You'll get there, and they'll all be dead. um, So right, that's sort of a consequence of that action if they decide to follow it, and it's fine. I'm happy with the NPCs dying. I mean, I'm not thrilled about it probably, but I understand that is part of the game, right? Is that the game world doesn't hang around in static loading, waiting for the PCs to come on screen, to come on stage, right? Other things happen if you decide not to do this thing. Well, there's probably some consequence that happens because of that. That's fine. Especially if you spend too much time. But if they do decide to follow this tangent, I don't want them to, like I said, I don't want them to follow the tangent for like 5 sessions. So I want like a one-sheet adventure. I want them to hopefully be able to finish the adventure in the current session that they've gotten off on the tangent. And so we can do the tangent will be resolved, and they'll come back to it. And then I don't have to worry about the countdown timer or anything like that. If they get back on track by the end of the session. If it stretches over into the next session, that's fine. They can wrap it up at the very beginning. Maybe they wrap up with like sort of the climax or something because they didn't go off on the tangent till over halfway through the session. That's fine. We'll pick up there with our purposeful start. Like put them into an encounter. They'll knock it out. They'll finish that. They'll get back on track, and I'll have made the countdown timer and rolled it, and we'll see where it goes from there. Right? Hopefully they'll get there in time. And because now I've started the timer, even while they're actively exploring, saying that cave system, trying to find those townspeople, and maybe it takes them 5 sessions while I'm still rolling that countdown timer. Right, once it's set, it just rolls until it's completely resolved. Until they find the people. So if they find the people, then obviously the countdown timer goes away. But if they screw around in the dungeon or they end up going the wrong way, or wrong, they don't go the way that does have them because they probably don't know. Well, that still counts down, right? It still continues to count down because I've already set it on the track. Ooh, having the mage tower as an earth elemental that's dormant. That's very cool. They killed the necromancer. It's on a rampage. That'd be a fun one too. Yeah, I've done. Actually, I don't think I actually ran the game. I had something that was a little bit similar. I had basically a cursed flying Dutchman ship that was kind of out of control, and it's sort of flying and terrorizing the countryside. And it kind of similar vibe. I don't think I ended up running that game though. I think I'd set it up for like a one shot, and I think we ended up not playing, or somebody fell out and something. I don't know. I think that's in my backlog somewhere. I should probably go find that. I could definitely run it again. So yeah, that's the parachute file. It's just something that happens, and I could just call it that because That's when the players do something I'm not expecting. And I'm like, oh, I need something to help me, and I'm just pulling a ripcord. This is my parachute. This is what's gonna save me. Keep me from dying here in the DM state. So yeah, I mean, I may take it. I may take it. I can definitely see the Earth Elemental Tower being fun. Um, I'm getting this definite sort of like insectoid, four leg kind of quadruped walking around kind of tower that I think is really cool. Kind of overgrown with like moss and stuff like that. That'd be really fun. So yeah, the parachute file is just to kind of save my butt if things get kind of out of hand. A lot of other DM advice will tell you to be like, hey, if somebody does something really weird like that, and you just call for like, oh, let's take a break, and then you can go to the bathroom and like flip out your phone and like start madly searching online for something to do, right? Something to sort of make up whatever you think the next scene's going to be that they're going to run into because they went in a totally different direction. That's definitely the way to go. I prefer to just kind of have. I don't find that it takes very long because I've kind of built up the bank of parachute one shot adventures and they're mostly low level in general because most of the games that I end up running are low level. So since I'm not most of the time having to go out and find them, and even if I do, it doesn't take very long. And sometimes I'll just make the parachute adventure myself if I don't find something I like. Like I'll just make my own. They're pretty easy. You can make like a 5-room dungeon pretty easily in an hour, maybe an hour and a half, if even that long. That's if you're really kind of spending some time on it. If you want to just like knock it out quick, you can probably knock one out. Fleshed out with encounters and everything in 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, pretty easily. So that's always something to keep in mind is that you can always throw something like that down or improvise it completely on the fly if you have the tools to do that. If you know how to, if you can make like combat encounters and things like that really quickly or traps or stuff like that. But the dungeon, setting up the dungeon itself is usually very easy for something like that because there's a finite amount of rooms, right? There's only so many things that can happen for sort of a one shot, one session adventure. So yeah, that's basically the full sheet. There's not too much else to say about it. Like I said, it's pretty simple. I've kind of boiled it down because I use this worksheet myself. I boiled it down to just specifically the stuff that I use, but is of course useful for lots of people. I feel like, and everybody's a little bit different with your prep, and so it really kind of takes just kind of doing it over and over again to kind of, and you'll understand the things that that you'll feel comfortable improvising and the things that you feel comfortable that you have prepared. Which is, if you watch WebDM, Jim's got a really good quote for prep that I really like. It's like prep, where he says, prep everything you're not comfortable improvising on the spot. Right? So, especially if you're a new DM, you're going to do a lot more prep. But as you become more comfortable with the group and with the game and with your own sort of DM style, you'll be like, oh, yeah, I don't really need to make up NPCs because I don't really have a problem making up NPCs on the spot. Okay, don't prep NPCs. That's pretty easy. You'll still want to take notes during the session because you're going to introduce them and you're going to have to remember them for later. So you're going to want to take some notes about them, but you don't need to do those notes that prep necessarily before the session if you feel comfortable enough sort of making those sort of things up. Oh, great. Thanks for coming. It's nice talking to you. I hope you're able to get some sleep, catch up on your sleep, and have a great. I guess it's going to be morning for you, evening for me. Bye. So yeah, I mean, for me, the biggest problem with prep, and I think it's the biggest problem that most people have with prep, is that no session prep is going to survive contact with the players. Right? We talked about that a little bit. The game's sort of fluid nature is sort of the best and worst parts about specifically D&D, but really any RPG, is that if you don't know if they can go anywhere and try to do anything at any time, then you can't really prep for every potential contingency, right? That's one of the things that people enjoy about a tabletop RPG as opposed to like a video game RPG. Because obviously you have to set limitations with a whether that's a computer or console game, right? The the system can't try to figure out everything you do. There's lots of hacking and glitches, and right, that's how we have an entire subculture of video games that are around speedrunning and using exploits to sort of break the game so you can beat it even faster, right? And you'll see some of that mentality come out in D&D. And obviously that's successful because the game can't really handle that, right? The game's just a set of programming. Whereas like a human dungeon master or game master can be like, I can actually change things, or yes, that's a great idea. I'm gonna let it work, but I'm not gonna let you completely derail the entire adventure because you kind of had one okay idea. That might sound like I'm punishing players. That's not what that kind of came out wrong. That's as I don't want you to utilize some sort of weird rules as written but not rules as intended exploit in the game system itself or in some weird wording in a spell to just completely destroy an entire adventure. Um, Knowing that that's what you're doing, right? On sort of a meta level, right? Where you're maybe doing something that an if you were role playing an actual person in the actual world wouldn't conceive probably realistically that this would have that intended effect, but that's something you as a player and player skills would use to do that. But yeah, since that's sort of the best and worst part about D&D, we can only prep things that we want to spend the most of our prep time on things we know, which we know is going to be that first sort of encounter, and make it as memorable and as good as you can, and think about the next most likely to happen things, and then think about, okay, I need maybe some stuff to kind of fill in the blank spots in between. There's sort of the cartilage in between the skeleton of scenes that I'm kind of have that I can use to sort of like kind of connect things or kind of use as a transition between things. And then, all right, well, as long as I'm doing that, if I have some free time, maybe I want to make a very specific map, find a very specific map to use for it, or maybe I want a very specific song to play. Maybe I want some really cool new battle music or something like that. That's fun. And then if you still have some time, you're like, all right, well, let me update my improvisation sources if I need to, my improv resources. So that way, when they do something a little bit weird, I feel like I'm prepared for it, or I feel like I have something to offer still, even if they're throwing me off. Right, the players are throwing off what I had set up and what I expected them to do, and they went way off book really quickly. Well, I can, I have these ways that'll help me at least fill out the session. And that's like, so you'll see that sort of recurring theme in things like the drop in NPCs and the the parachute file and the Interscene fluff is they're going to give us some extra resources so I can fill the time. Because at that point, if things are off the rails, all I'm trying to do is play out the clock, right? I'm just trying to make it to the session's end, and then I get to restart the whole prep thing again, and hopefully it'll go a little bit closer to what I was expecting next time. But I want to have enough content and keep player interest enough that I can sort of make it through to what I think feels like a fulfilling and complete session. Because once the session's over, right, like I said, we start over again. Where I get to do a whole new worksheet of prep and implement what I just learned from the previous session. So I'm like, oh, it looks like maybe I thought they were going to take this one specific route, and they're definitely not taking that route. And they had really good reasons not to take that route. So I'm not going to prep anything that would deal anything with maybe this route to get to a stronghold or whatever it is. I'm like, okay, so they said they're going to instead maybe try to swim up the river and maybe try to get in the back way or something like that. Okay, well, now I know what stuff to prep that way. okay, that gives me good ideas, right? And now I can make stuff around that. So basically, all of our improvisation stuff is just to basically help us get to the end of the session with, and as well as we can, keep up the facade that everything is planned out. And you know, as the dungeon master, as the game master, I'm fully in control, and you guys are welcome to do whatever you want to do, and I'm able to roll with any of the punches that you give me. Right? It's that sort of game master confidence, and then of course that comes from experience and understanding what you need to prep for yourself, and also being able to prep things that will help you improvise. And unfortunately, there's nothing that's all sort of personal level stuff. So obviously, this sheet is what kind of works for me, that I found really useful. And then I'm very much like a system builder kind of person, so I want to set up this like support system for myself. That's why I have the NPCs. That's why I have, you know, the random encounter tables. That's why I have the Interscene Fluff. That's why I have the parachute file. Um, just so I don't get what would what would be detrimental to me as a DM, just for my own personal style, is if I'm like, oh, well, they decided to go off on this tangent, and right, they're chasing the weird bird that's making the weird sounds that they think is trying to communicate with them for some reason. Even though I'm like, I didn't really build anything beyond a bird shows up and chirps weirdly at you. Like that could be the entire interesting fluff that I set up. They're like, let's follow the bird. And now I'm like, crap, I don't have anything prepared for that. Now, if they're doing sort of an overland thing, I could take some of the stuff that I prepped. Like I said, if they're traveling through the hillside, through the highlands, I probably have some highlands based encounters or scenes that at least fit the area, and I can just kind of move those over and put them sort of in the way for them to pass by. And so that might put them back on track, right? The same way that we kind of use the Interscene stuff to unstuck the party, we can kind of we can sometimes manipulate the encounters, especially if they're encounters that aren't locked to a specific location or a specific time. If we can move those encounters around, we can, instead of unstucking them, we can knock them back kind of on the right path. But of course, it's free to them. They could run through that encounter and do that, and then think like that's the aside encounter instead of like the plot critical encounter, and then be like, "Yeah, sorry, I'd love to deal with you, but I'm really kind of chasing down this bird, and that seems really important." So for me, being like, "Well, I have nothing to prep for that," and it's like I can only let them chase around this bird so long before they're gonna get tired of it, and they're not gonna be super happy with the session and with my DMing. So I'm like, okay, well, if I have sort of those parachute files, well, I have something that I can toss in there. Like I said, I can move some encounters around probably. I can do this one shot adventure if I need to. To just because again, I'm just trying to make it to the end of the session. Once I'm at the end of the session, right, I get to retry it all over again. Right, so it's just kind of a cycle. That's how I view it. It's primarily just a cycle, and you're just trying to prep enough to get you through the 3, 4, 5, however long you play RPGs. Maybe that's 1 hour. I used to do a duet D&D online thing, and we only played for like an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours. Um, and that was definitely during sort of COVID time, and everybody's got real bad like Zoom fatigue and stuff like that. So people just didn't. It was really hard to hold people's attention for any longer than that. And I definitely feel like that because I'm definitely still playing one game that's online right now, and really I feel like three the 3 hour mark is about the max that most people can kind of hang in there to play a game, and that's if things are going well. Um, Whereas in person, I feel like depending on your players and the setup and what's going on in the game, it's you can definitely stay pretty engaged for a pretty standard 3 to 4 hour session without too much problems. I know a lot of groups that I've played in or run for, we could do, you know, somewhere more closely between 4 and 6 hours. That's sort of our play time, and that's not all. that's all. I should say that's all session time, but that's not all play time. Usually, there's time in the beginning, time in the end, and usually like kind of a break in the middle, which is usually helpful. Gives the people an opportunity to feel like they can check their phones or make phone calls or get something to eat, use the bathroom, that kind of stuff. Talk about stuff, and just kind of have a break from the game. Right? Used to be why I really enjoyed playing with smokers because smokers need smoke breaks during sessions. They can't, or at least all the smokers I've ever played with can't sit down for a 3 to 4 hour session without having a smoke. So even just that fact, we would continue to play actually in a lot of instances where we would all get up and maybe go outside and we'd do sort of like the RP scenes and inter-party stuff outside where we didn't need the character sheets and dice and stuff like that. So that's really fun, and just getting up and walking around a little bit, you know, make sure that everybody stays awake and sort of engaged, and they're not falling asleep or getting totally distracted and getting fidgety. And let's see, that's mostly everything. I did want to share. Um, let me do this. I did want to share this. So you can find out more information about this sort of specifically. Pull this up. Boop. So this is over on the blog on the website, redraggedfiend.com. And this is a write up that I did previously. Wow, it's been almost exactly actually a little bit over a year now. Wow, since I did the first post about, well, not the first post, but the updated post about this. And he goes into some more details about stuff that I found that's really useful. Kind of doing the post session prep. Like for me, it's really important to make sure to take a break and kind of bunk off and do something else. Um, I have a tendency when I finish a session and I do the recap notes, I'll want to keep going. I'll want to start to like immediately jump into prepping for the next session. But it's actually better at my in my experiences sort of force yourself to take some time off. I feel like super motivated during that time, but I'm also going to like scribble things down and then I'm going to look at my notes like a week later and I'm going to be like, what was I trying to say? Like I don't remember what I was doing, and it was like, and over that time, like my brain will think, oh, I thought I was doing something. I had written down something else, so now my brain has sort of slowly been prepping something else. But the idea is that this section is about transferring, short-term memory in our heads to long-term memory, and the idea of like our brain keeps working on stuff even when we're no longer working on that thing. That's why you kind of get ideas for stuff in the shower and stuff like that, or maybe you wake up in the night with an idea, something like that from being asleep. It's that our brain still like constantly thinks about that stuff in the background, so we should try to utilize that. Kind of talk about different encounter types. Talk about blended or mixed scenes, like blended encounter types, like combats that also have an exploration or investigation thing tied into it, which can be really fun. We were just talking about sort of like the monster spawners. That's what I would call the combat slash exploration investigation encounter, right? Because there's a different goal other than just defeat the monsters. And you're going to need at least one person in the party, one of the characters needs to be working on that. We talk a little bit about the hiccup method, which is a little bit different. That's a little bit more adventure planning, but it can be if you're getting to the point where you need to improvise stuff or you need to play for time. The hiccup method is really useful. Basically, the idea is that, and it's kind of, again, sort of like writing advice. Okay, if you want to make a story, like, well, let me think of it this way. So let's use Lord of the Rings as an example. So Frodo knows that he needs to take the ring to the prancing pony, right? So, all right, and you're like, all right, that's what we're gonna do. Well, that's not really an adventure. It's like, no, but what's a hiccup? What's something that could go wrong or something that needs to be overcome? What's going to keep Frodo from getting to the prancing pony? Oh, well, maybe there's, a ring wraith. Okay, well, yeah, that's a pretty good one. A ring wraith chasing you around. That's a pretty good deterrent. Pretty big hiccup for not reaching your goal, right? And so you can do that again and again. And once you start thinking about that, I feel like you can find a lot of examples of that specifically in video games. Um, and I think BioWare is pretty notorious for doing this, as is Grand Theft. Grand Theft Auto. Rockstar is really good, really, really pretty big on that. Actually, Rockstar is probably the biggest defender of it because they use it all the time, um, which which kind of makes it look silly once you realize what's kind of going on. It's kind of like the Telltale games and choice but not choice. So if you've ever seen their like Red Dead Redemption 2 or something like that, where they use this, they're going to give you an objective. You go to do the objective, something goes wrong because something always goes wrong, right? That's the hiccup. Okay, well, now our goal has changed from goal A to goal B. Like, okay, but then there's another hiccup in between where we are and getting to goal B, right? And you can kind of do that ad nauseum, but there's a lot of fatigue that kind of comes with that for players. So you don't want to do it too often. You certainly don't want to do it all the time, but it is a really useful tool when, especially like I said, if you need to like pad out an adventure or a session, and they're like, "Oh, we need to get to that place." Okay, well, here's something I think that could keep you from getting there. And if you do that, you can think of those as like obstacles and challenges. Like I said, if we're doing like an overland, over the hills, hillside kind of journey, be like, oh, that's what I think about for like encounters or scenes to show up. Okay, what are the things that would come up that would actually keep you from getting there? It's like, oh, well, there's a like a suspended bridge over a chasm, but it's broken. Now you got an obstacle and a challenge to get over, right? And so if you start thinking about it that way, it's pretty easy to sort of fill up scenes and encounters in a game session. Oh yeah, this is really good. And here's some interesting moments, some fluff I prepared for a recent D&D session, at least last year. uh, and these are just some sort of things that I had pulled up. And actually, I used the one that I was just kind of talking about earlier, where NPC A gets sidetracked investigating and sketching an ancient dwarves device. That was a real example. That's something that I actually used. um, yeah, so the NPC is going with them, but the NPC, like I said, is sort of like an amateur archaeologist and decides like they're going to take care of this. So they're sort of kind of gives the player something to play off of, right? Something for their characters to deal with an NPC maybe they're supposed to. In this case, they're supposed to be actually protecting and guiding, but the NPC themselves gets kind of sidetracked with stuff because that's why they're down here. And so there can be a little bit of tension, a little bit of frustration. Like obviously, I don't want them. I don't want the party to hate that NPC. That NPC is their employer. I don't want them to abandon the NPC in this dungeon. But I do want to have a little bit of tension where they're like, this guy, he's stopping again. You sort of have that fun interaction, a little bit of light frustration with it, or where he maybe can like get them into a little bit of extra trouble if they don't like try to corral him a little bit. I had a distant bellowing roar that echoes up from the corridor. So I had this is an expiring timer one that I had. So while the party was trying to get to this dungeon, one of the random encounters that I had planned or had set up and ended up rolling was a troll encounter. That there was a random troll they were going to run across. Well, I can't remember what happened. I can't remember if they evaded the. I don't know. They didn't invade the troll because they didn't even know the troll was there. They so just because there's a troll or anytime they set up like a creature encounter doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be combat. And so, really, what I wanted to do with this scene when it was a random encounter is just for them to see the troll, basically. Be aware that there is a troll around. Actually, I think that's what happened. I think they came across footprints, if I remember correctly. I gave them footprints. But then they rolled so awfully that they couldn't figure out what the creature was. They just rolled really poorly. And so I was like, all right, well, I don't know. It's a big creature, has kind of vaguely humanoid feet. And they were like, all right, don't know what that is. Kept on going. So I was like, all right, well, there's a troll. And you're sort of in his area, so he's probably going to follow you. So I put a timer for that, and then they went into the dungeon, and I was like, okay, well, the troll is following them through the dungeon. And so this is the first time they sort of get the telegraphing that, that there is some other weird creature that's coming up. It's coming up from the complex, and the way that this is set up is the way it's kind of set up is that they're actually hearing it behind them, not like close, like in the next room, but like coming from the direction they've already been in, and they're like, what the heck is that? And that's just to help sort of foreshadow, to kind of telegraph that, like, hey, there's something else in here, and it's headed your way, it sounds like. So be prepared. Our next one, NPC B pulls one of the PCs aside to air concerns about the dead weight in the adventuring bin. Yeah, that was a really fun RP moment for the PC. So I had this real MF of an NPC. He was a bad dude. He was a Durgar, poisoner, kind of a rogue. He was a mean, tough dude, and I'd set him up like that. He had gotten in a fight in town, or somebody else had picked a fight with him in town, and that Durgar beat the ever living snot out of him. And basically intimidated his way into the adventuring party, because they had like a sort of a host of hirelings with them, of sidekicks with them, and they had even more to choose from. One of those being the one that he beat the snot out of. And so they kind of go through, and he's been doing, because he was pretty powerful. I didn't really build him intentionally to be that way, but he ended up in a way, like, once I was done building him, where I was like, oh man, this guy's actually like super powerful. That wasn't really what I was intending, but he is probably as powerful, if not more powerful, than the NPCs at this point. And it kind of made sidekicks of all different sort of level scales, so he was actually a level above the party. Because I was letting them choose whoever they wanted to bring with them, and they had no idea about like what level appropriate sidekicks were. So they chose this guy, which was a higher level than them, but they also chose some people that were like level 1 and weren't super useful for them, other than like maybe casting a healing spell or something like that. But in a lot of ways, were also liabilities in the dungeon. And that led to sort of this NPC who was going off to scout ahead with one of the other PCs, sort of pulled her aside and had this conversation, talking about like, hey, and he's, like I said, he was extremely intimidating. And he was like, look, there's a bunch of dead weight in the party. We just went through a fight that didn't go super well. We won, but it didn't go super well for a lot of the party. I know that he's talking to the PC. I know that you seem to be one of the more capable people. When this goes south, and I feel it's gonna go south, what are we gonna do? Are you gonna stay here and try to save all these people, or are we just gonna book it and try to get out of here? And so they had that fun sort of like tense one-on-one interaction, and then had to go back to the group and not talk about it with the rest of the group, which was really fun. This one is, you come across a rat that appears to apprise you intelligently and will scurry, then stop, attempting to lead you elsewhere. That's kind of what I was thinking about when I was thinking about the bird example. And this one is actually, this is an aside, but it was actually tied into what's going on in the dungeon. So they had the ability to get some interesting clues about what's going on in the dungeon by the way that they deal with this rat. And the next one is NPCC gets a head splitting headache. So that was one of the things, is that there's an aboleth that was sort of the big bad in this dungeon, and that was the one that's sort of like mind controlling the rat and using it to sort of like divine the party and what's going on for them, and trying to lead them closer to the aboleth so they could exert more control on the party and have a better opportunity to basically like enthrall them. And so as they go through the dungeon, once every session, I make somebody in the party. I had sort of a random roll table, and at the start of every session or after they rest or anything like that, they have to make a save versus being enthralled by this thing that kind of comes to them in their mind, especially if they're asleep. And so this guy, this NPC actually succeeded against the enthrall. And so, but there's still a side effect of that, and they're like, oh, he's got a really head splitting headache, had this weird dream of something trying to talk to him, but he couldn't see it, and he didn't know what it was. Kind of, again, sort of telegraphing that there's like weird stuff that's happening in the dungeon, and it seems to be doing sort of mind effect kind of stuff. But because this is a like vertical level dungeon, and the aboleth's obviously where the water is, and they are on a totally different level. So they didn't really have sort of like any immediate sort of visual cues that this is what this creature was or anything like that. There were other things that they needed to go through. There were other sort of NPCs to talk to, and like scraps of clues that they could find, writings about stuff that they could find stuff, and items and things like that. Um, but yeah, there was lots of like little like breadcrumbs about, hey, here's kind of give you an idea of how you can start figuring out what's going on in this dungeon. Next one is, in an alcove stands a pedestal topped by a bull-headed stone idol. Carved into its open hands is an offering plate still stained by its ancient, rotted away offerings. That's it. That's just the aside. If they want to put something, if they want to make some offering, they can do checks about trying to figure out what the stone idol is. I didn't write any of that up. That was, like I said, you prep the things that you're not comfortable improving. I'm like, yeah, I can improv whatever this bullheaded stone idol is if they ask about it, and roll a good religion check. And will something happen if they put stuff in the offering plate? Well, it depends. I mean, I made it seem like it was definitely organic matter that they had put in it. So, if they try to put like a pouch of coins in it, or a gemstone or something like that, something that they think of as valuable, may or may not work. I don't know. They didn't try it, so I didn't make it up. So, or if they were like, oh well, I'm gonna give it some of my rations or something like that, and it's like, okay, well, maybe that does something, maybe it's not, maybe it's just, it's just a prayer offering, maybe it doesn't have any mechanical thing that's going on. But I didn't need to come up with that because I didn't try any of that stuff. And then we talked about sort of like that minor loot and things like that, and all the like asides not necessarily being bad things, or all the countdown timers being bad things. This last one is, yeah, you guys, probably trip across a loose floor tile, and then you peel it back and you find the rotted remains of a coin purse with 2d6 ancient coins in it. Okay. Like, it's not a lot of money, right? And they're ancient coins, so they're probably not legal tender. So they can't, buy, if they have 7 gold, they can't use one of those gold coins to buy, rations or whatever, because it's not a coin of the realm. It's not a recognized currency. But for the right person, whether they just want to sell it, they could just sell it just as straight metal, right, and get actual coinage from it. Or if they find maybe somebody who's interested in like artifacts or things like that, like maybe the NPC they're with, who's really into this sort of thing, well, they're probably more likely to pay you a premium for those coins if you take the time to find things to sell to the right people. Which is another thing that I try to do in a lot of my games, is try not to make the loot super straightforward. I don't want them to just be like, okay, yeah, I got gemstones worth this, jewelry worth this. Be like, okay, you think it's roughly around this, you can exchange it out for certainly a lower value. But if you found maybe the right person, or Another thing that I like to do, especially with something like jewelry or something like that, or uh, really any sort of item, especially sort of like an art item, whether that's jewelry or like a box or something like that, that's got like a gemstone in it or something like that, is that rather than, and it's something that I look for to do as a player, is that rather than just offload it and just turn it into coinage to buy gear or whatever, especially in 5e where it's really easy to run to tap out what you need for gold very easily because you can't buy magic items in 5e except like potions, except common items for the most part. At least that's the way the rules are written. Certainly you can, and I have other ways for people to buy stuff. But you end up with a lot of things like jewelry or gemstones that are just money in disguise, kind of. But what I like to do is that you can save those things and you can try to sell it to somebody who's really interested in that so you can get some more money for it, which is cool. And makes it worthwhile to kind of hang on to that sort of stuff. Or, and another thing that I like to do is use it as gifts, right? Use it as bribes or gifts or things like that for NPCs. And be like, oh, so one of the things that I've had a number of characters do over my history of playing is that if, depending on the type of character, some of my characters will insist on carrying a bottle of wine with them, literally to use as a gift. And they're like, "Oh, you run into this group of hobgoblins out in the wild. Oh, well, I have this bottle of wine. Here's a gift for you guys. Can you guys tell us anything about what's going on?" It's sort of like a parlay thing. And be like, I had again we were running very old school. I think we are playing OSE hex crawl kind of game. Very they were doing a persistent world with multiple groups in it, and we rolled some random encounters. Obviously, as we were traveling around, and I think it was hobgoblins. We ran into a small warband of hobgoblins. Obviously, we didn't want to fight them. This is like old school D&D. They outnumbered us. Um, it would be a really hard fight. We might win. We might die. We died a lot in that campaign, unfortunately. Um, so I used the opportunity to be like, "Hey, well, like, here's a bottle of wine. Can we like share your campfire and like maybe guys can give us some information about like stuff that's around in the area?" And so we got some intel about like what's kind of in the nearby hexes that they felt comfortable telling us about. And then, I think we did some like arm wrestling or something like that. They had some games and some different stuff that they did, and everybody kind of had their moment to kind of have an interaction or two with like different groups of the hobgoblins and talk about stuff and find out things. And that was sort of the end of the encounter, which was a lot more fun than just doing a standard, oh, you ran across 7 hobgoblins, roll initiative, instead of having that. So it's cool to have those, or at least I think it's cool to have those sorts, to save some of those sort of things, and just so maybe you can use them later, right? Because again, otherwise they're just money in disguise. They're right. It's just money with extra steps in the middle. So if you have some way to use those things, like if you find diamonds that you can use in like ritual spells and things like that, that's always fun. Or having like a ring and maybe you want to court somebody, or you want to maybe you just want to wear it to make yourself look fancy, or however you want. Very fun. Like I had a character that we ran across, I think, a pair of earrings. And when I created the character, I had already set it up. He had pierced ears, and so we came across these. We didn't attack. We killed some bad guys, and we looted some bodies. And I think it was a lady actually, and she had these nice sort of pearl like water drop earrings, and it was like, all right, my character takes those. He forfeits his amount, his split of the gold to take those items, and he traded out his earrings for some nicer earrings. I was like, cool, that's fun. I want that. Now my character feels like okay, like he's getting upgrades for himself, even if they're just wholly cosmetic. Just like sometimes I'll have a character if they've been in wild for a while or something like that, if they're a particular kind of character, I'll have them show up and be like, oh, they want to take a bath, or maybe they want to get a haircut and get maybe like get a fresh shave from a barber or something like that. The sort of stuff that like people would normally just do, but we don't ever really talk about. And that gives you an opportunity. I like to also do it because it's again sort of like the realism and kind of being part of the character, but also because it gives the DM some ammo, right? You're telling me that you're going to go to a place and do a thing that's probably not related to of not really of import for anything else. So otherwise we probably wouldn't RP this out. It's like a shopping montage. Be like, yeah, you just go buy stuff. That's fine. We don't need to role play out every piece of adventuring gear that you're gonna buy and all the rations you're gonna buy and the tent and stuff like that, or getting repairs done on your armor. That's fine. You pay the cost, you get the things. That's fine. But if you're a player or you have a player that throws you this sort of interaction, you can be like, okay, well, I can use one of those Interscene like fluffs if I want to drop in an NPC, or maybe I want to seed maybe another adventure or something else that's kind of going on, or I want to introduce them to a specific NPC that I have built up. That's an opportunity to do that, right? Because your player is putting them in a scene and being like, hey, if you want to throw something in the scene with me, that's totally cool. It is also an opportunity to do that for, if you're a good player, you do that for your DM, and you also do it for other players. So you have an opportunity where it's like, I'm going to, like, here's a good example. So we were playing D&D last week, and we had just shown up in a very religious town, and we're trying to figure out, everybody's kind of like, oh, what are we going to do? Blah, blah, blah. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this. Oh, we should probably research this one thing. And my character's like, all right, well, we're in a religious town. I was playing a cleric. It was like he's going to go to whatever is the most appropriate temple or shrine or whatever for the god that he follows. And then just kind of turn and look at the rest of the party. Does anybody else want to come with me? Is anybody else going to go with my character? And, had somebody in the group be like, yeah, I'm going to go. It's like, all right. So we split the party, right? People are always like, don't split the party. Splitting the party's fine. Just, especially if you're like in town or something like that, you guys don't all need to stay together. People don't do that. It'd be like, yeah, I mean, I would say ideally use the buddy system, because if something bad happens to a character when they're off by themselves, like, even though you're going to role play this out in front of the group of players, right? In universe, the characters aren't going to know if anything's gone wrong, and then that can be kind of a problem, because then you have to figure out a way to get them to understand that something's wrong, so they can go get the player, and then while they're rescuing the player, there's nothing for the other player to do. But if you keep it so at least nobody's by themselves, or at least the person doing something isn't by themselves, and you do want to have one of these fun scenes or something like that, now that you have like multiple players and characters involved. So if one player is going to get like jumped or something by NPCs, there's another character there to also help, right? Or to help them run away, and it just gives them more versatility and kind of puts you in a position where one bad die roll can really screw up a character's scene, or whatever you have planned, because you were expecting them to roll above a 3 and they didn't. Because that's how it tends to work, right? You're like, oh, the DC is super low, they'll totally beat this, and they'll be like, roll to 1. Okay, you have no idea, and you didn't get any information out of the scene, and I'm sorry, you did not get the thing you're going for. But if you had somebody else with you, you'd be like, oh, well, they could roll that bad roll and be like, oh, but that's okay, because you have this character with you who's obviously here to help, right? So you have advantage on the roll. You can roll again, and fingers crossed you're going to roll above a 1, right? Or you can just be like, oh, because you have somebody else here, you didn't find anything in what you were researching, and then you ask the other character, like the other player, what are you doing? And they're like, oh, I'm kind of looking through the shelves for this one thing, and you can kind of give them a little special moment, or have them stumble across the thing that the other characters are actually trying to find, which is always fun. They'll be like, "Oh, are you looking for this?" Yeah, it was just over there, which can also be fun. And especially good if you like have different people in the party split up, so it's not always like the same two or three characters going together. If they change up the teams, change up the pairings, so everybody has some time to sort of like do that intra party role play, which is really helpful. Yeah, I just kind of talk about how to write the scene stuff. I kind of glossed over it in the worksheet, but this kind of goes into it in more detail. So if you wanna check this out, this is up on the website. That's pretty much most of it. It kind of goes on and on and on. Like I said, it's a lot more than what we went over here. So it's the same stuff that we went over here. It's just in more depth to kind of go over it because it's easier to write than talk about. So if you want to check it out, you can go to redragonfiend.com, look for this blog. That's how to prep for D&D sessions, May 1st, last year. You can read it. Have a good time. But that is going to be it for me. Hopefully you guys had fun going through this stuff. It made me think of this because I was prepping for something. Part of our group is going to be gone over the weekend. So, but some of us are still going to get together, and I was like, oh, I'll run like a one shot. And so I was looking at this prep stuff, and I was like, oh yeah, I could do a stream since I don't have a game. I can do a stream and kind of talk about the session prep. Now, the funny thing is that I'm actually not using this sheet for the prep because the prep's a little bit different because it's specifically a one shot. So I need like full soup to nuts, start to finish adventure stuff, which obviously, like I said in the kind of the beginning, the session sheet is not meant for one shots really. It's for prepping sessions of a larger adventure and or campaign. It's not meant to be like a fully encapsulated adventure. So I have a different sort of adventure skeleton that I kind of use for that. So for the stuff I'm prepping tomorrow, I kind of have some of these. I have sort of elements of both this sheet and the adventure sheet kind of together, and then sort of trimmed down because I only have a few hours to kind of move through everything, and I want to make sure that we get a nice resolution at the end. That's everything for me. We are going to hit the solo RPG back on this Sunday, so make sure to check that out. We're going to be live on Twitch. If you want to catch up on that or any of the other stuff we've been working on with these videos, you can check out the YouTube channel. All that stuff is that way. All that stuff's over there. All the information, reddragonfiend.com, and on YouTube and Twitter, it's at reddragonfiend. Go check that out. We're on episode 9 of the D&D 5e solo RPG. It's been a lot of fun. We didn't... Basically, everything up until the last session was basically the prologue. So we set up our sort of sandbox for the world. It's kind of a hex crawl kind of thing going on. And then the next episode, we sort of set up the main character, Leah, and sort of her background and sort of stuff that she has going on. It's very character driven, right? We were just talking about that earlier. It's really hard. If you want to run a successful sandbox, you have to, because of the nature of the sandbox games, since they're not sort of plot railroaded, like linear. I shouldn't say railroad because railroad's different. But isn't sort of a linear adventure path. They can kind of go anywhere and do everything and kind of exploring and coming across things you weren't expecting. It's much more improvisation kind of setup gameplay. So to have a more fulfilling narrative arc, you have to do a character-driven story rather than a plot-driven story. So Leia has her own goals and her own things that she's trying to figure out, and her own bad points and her own sort of like backstory stuff that's going to come to bite her in the butt, and already has a little bit. One of them just kind of reared its head in the last session, and she kind of had a panic attack and passed out. So that was fun. It was fun. It was fun for her, but it was fun for me and hopefully for you guys watching to kind of be able to start injecting this stuff into that and kind of show Leah the effect of Leah's past on her present, other than just sort of the nasty scars she has on her face. but kind of getting into the gritty details about some of the stuff that's happened for her in the past. And as she's trying to unwind what's going on with the present, with the mysterious disappearance of Harold, and what that has to do with their research, and this weird, out of control elemental that they need to investigate the corrupted armor that it had on it. Lots of fun. And we also saw that Ott, the sidekick that we had set up for our in session two, who I thought was going to be sort of like the primary sidekick, kind of exited the narrative, at least for now. Might come back later, but for now was not interested in following Leah on her journey to Carjuntan, and so she ended up picking up Omer, and now I've elevated Omer to a fully fleshed out sidekick, and we'll see how that goes because he is definitely not combat oriented, and she's a wizard, so things are gonna be real tough if they get in a fight. Real tough. But yeah, we're doing that on Sunday, so come and check it out. You can hit up the YouTube channel and catch up on the stuff up to the newest episode that we're going to be doing. We'll do more of these impromptu streams during the week whenever I have an opportunity to. And the best way, of course, to get notifications for the Sunday streams or these impromptu streams that aren't really scheduled is to, of course, follow on Twitch. You can also follow me over on Twitter. I try to, every time I'm going to do a stream, send out a link to let people know. If you prefer to use Twitter for your notifications, I'm not 100% accurate on doing that. I don't have 100% track record, but I try to do it most times, and I feel like I do it most times. But if you want to make sure that you for sure get the notification, the best way to do that is to follow on Twitch. And then if you're watching all the back stuff on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe there, and hit the notification bell so you can know when the new episode is posted. Which, has been about once a week, so there you go. You can probably just guess it. But that's it for me. Thanks for coming along with me. I hope you guys had a lot of good information come out of this. I hope you're able to turn it in and use some of it for your own gaming. Or if you haven't run any game support, this will kind of give you some of the confidence to, step up and do it. It's a lot of fun. It seems really intimidating, especially if you're playing with players that have played for a long time, like we were talking about. If you have veteran players, it can be intimidating. I did that too. That's how I sort of jumped into DMing. At least as an adult, I DM'd a little bit as a kid, but not for dumb kids that were dumb like me who didn't know what was going on and couldn't tell, good DMing from bad DMing. But as an adult, sort of getting back into it and running for people that had played for 10, 20 plus years, and just getting smoked. And certainly in the first session, I ran and felt like I was definitely in over my head, but that might give you some fear that you're put off by it. But what was helpful for me, I think, in that situation is that I was running a pre-published thing, so it wasn't something I made, and so a lot of the failings that came with it were based on what was written. It was based on issues that were with the thing that was the adventure, the one-shot sort of adventure that was written. And where I struggled is that I didn't have the experience and or confidence to be able to fill in the gaps to go beyond what was on the paper, right? Which is why we talk about, prepping what you're not ready to improvise. So I wasn't ready to add my own human element for the improvisation. And once I realized that, right, I had that first session, I was like, oh man, they really blew through all this stuff, and then I was left with nothing in my hands to kind of like work or try to build this out to be able to sort of improvise and roll with the punches with them. And it's like, okay, well then maybe that's one of the things that I need to work for in my prep. Like I can't rely on the adventure that's written as it is to go 100% that way. And so obviously once I figured that out, I was able to start prepping my own stuff. And then of course, once I'd run some published stuff and kind of understand what worked, what didn't work, kind of work with my style, what kind of worked with my player styles, I was able to sort of figure out what to make for my own adventures based off of what I enjoyed, what I liked to prep, what I liked to run, what the players seemed to enjoy, what they liked to play in, and find where those Venn diagrams cross over. And start from there. And I've been hooked ever since. Like I love coming up with adventures. I love running stuff. Um, just as much as I love playing. It's a different type of fun, right? Running the game is a different type of fun than playing the game. That's why you have people who play who never run, and that's why you have some people who only run and never play. And then you have a lot of people that enjoy doing both, like me. I enjoy doing both of them. I don't want to be the forever DM, but I also don't enjoy being the forever player either. Too, like I like running. Like I said, it's a different type of fun, and it's a different type of experience. But it's definitely one I feel like everybody who's interested in the hobby, who plays in the hobby, should definitely take the time to at least try it out. And I mean more than once. Like try it out a few times. Like you're gonna crash and burn some, and that's fine. Especially if you're playing with people who know stuff, and you can rely on those players to be like, hey, do you know what the rule is for this thing? Because I don't really know, or things like that. And I feel like good veteran players will give you a break or give you a heads up. They'll help you out. They'll dive on the grenades and they'll help you sort of find your way to the end of the adventure, which is really helpful, and you can learn a lot from that. And hopefully, like I said, if you're asking that feedback at the end of the session, they'll give you that feedback as well. I think veteran players especially know the value of a good DM, especially a fresh DM, that they can help build towards where they think they would be a better DM instead of bringing in a more experienced DM, which is great, and we enjoy playing with experienced DMs. But they already have some of their own like foibles and personality already kind of carved into stone, right? It's very try to teach an old dog new tricks kind of thing. So sometimes it's easier to take somebody who's new and be like, hey, this is why I think maybe you should try out this or look at this, or maybe look at building this part of your DMing experience up more, and that I think would be a really good skill for you. Those are really useful. So if you find those players, try to hold on to them because they're good players, and they want to help you be a better DM because they want better games too, just like you want better games. But that's everything for me. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Like I said, we'll do the stream on Sunday, and so hopefully you'll be there, and I'll see you guys then. But whether it's then or the next stream or on YouTube, I'll see you guys soon. All right, guys. Bye.